The reality that we hear all sorts of things about what's true and what's not. We need to understand how to apply biblical concepts to our worldview. We are hit by the world's point of view. There's a show that used to be on the air, and I'm going to tell you right now that it was so phony. But everybody assumed that show was Christian because it had angels who had used to be dead people and are now coming back to Earth. No, it's not the Club. There's an old movie, an old show program with Michael Landon in it called Touched by an Angel. It's really old, but it's a kind of how the world sees angels. It's kind of how it sees Christianity. That angels are just dead people who come back. But see, that's not what the Bible teaches. And that's not really a biblical worldview. And so for the next couple of weeks, we're going to be looking at what is truth, how to understand the biblical worldview. I found this quote, truth is truth, no matter who believes it. But a lie is a lie. Everyone believes it. The reality is that we live in a world that has so many competing voices. Worldview is basically just a set of assumptions about how the basic makeup of the world. Things like, what is the nature of reality? Some worldviews assume reality is fundamentally material. Other worldviews assume reality is fundamentally spiritual. Then there's, what's the nature of people? Are we nothing more than electromechanical machines? Electrochemical machines? Do we have free will? Is it all predestined? Are we little robots? Are we gods? We're evolving into godhood. There's worldviews that teach that. And then we want to know, what happens to us at death? Do we terminate? Does it just cease to exist? Or is it there's something afterwards, something beyond death? Are we held in spiritual stasis? Do we sleep? Or does, like the Bible says, absent from the body, present with the Lord? What's the basis of values and morals? Is it the character of God? Or is it our instinct for survival? Is it strongest of the fittest? Having a role is sort of like having a heart. You can go your whole life not ever talking about your heart or seeing it operate, but everyone has one. And it's operating in you and on you all the time. In the same way, you could hold your assumptions about the world for years. Never question them. Never even give them any thought. For most of history, that's kind of the way it was. Why? Because, well, most people would live their whole lives and never travel more than 20 miles from their hometown. That means you could live cradle to grave and never meet anyone who disagreed with you, with your assumptions about the world. So you just take your worldview for granted. This is what my grandmother believed, and this is what my grandfather believed, and so this is what I believe. But today, thanks to technology and travel, other worldviews have been brought right next door. So while your Christian grandparents didn't have to think about Islam or secular humanism or Zen Buddhism or Opium, These days, you can't go a day without an alien view being thrown in your face, especially on TV or Facebook. Well, if you're a rational person, all this exposure to other worldviews leads to questions like, are my assumptions about the world right just because they're mine? Just because they're the answers that I absorb from my family or culture, does that make them right or truthful? So today, Christianity is not the only worldview option available to a humble, rational person. We live in a world where Christianity has to compete in a marketplace of worldviews. And the question is, can it compete? So today Christianity is, so for those of you in the investigation mode, here's the money question. Does Christianity have a rational basis? Are its assumptions warranted based on the evidence in the world? Does it do the best job of collecting all the available data from the world into an operating theory that A, works, and B, is logically consistent, and C, corresponds to reality? In short, is it true? Now, for those of you who are Christians, I challenge you, and you already assume, and some of you are sinners, well, you have a Christian worldview, so how is it going to challenge me? How is this going to challenge me? Well, first off, if you live in the West, a great deal of our worldview is affected more by what we read in Scripture, more than what we read in Scripture is affected more by the world around us. You're bombarded with the worldview. We did a series here a couple years ago called God Never Said That. And we talked about some things that the church believes are true, but there's no biblical foundation for them. For instance, God helps those who help themselves. Really? No, he doesn't. Those who can't help themselves, otherwise he would have never had to come and die for us. To help ourselves, he wouldn't have had to send Jesus to die for us. So, every reason we present, I hope, is a reason to live more boldly, following Jesus, and less ashamed or cowed by the views. To both believers and seekers, I say this. For a person to be intellectually honest, you should not only be able to detect the worldview of other people, you should know exactly why, in light of so many options available, you think yours is right. So, the first question we're going to answer tonight is going to be the question, what is truth? In John 8:31 through 32, it says this, so to those Jews who had believed in him, if you abide in my word, hold fast to my teachings, and live in accordance with them, you are my disciples. And you shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Well, see, the problem with that verse is, what is truth? I mean, it's really easy to say the word, but you say the word truth, and everybody's got their own idea of what truth is. What is truth? When on trial, Jesus stood before the governor Pilate and said, in John 18:37-38, for this reason I was born, and for I came into the world to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. So it seems that the question, what is true, was of paramount importance to Jesus. He unambiguously claimed to be in possession of truth. Then he draws a line through the human race and says, if you want truth, you need to be my side of the line. So what is truth? What is truth for us? Does truth change? Is truth objective or subjective? Now I'm going to let you in a little secret. There's a real simple answer to what is truth, and we'll get there in a minute. But I need to look at some, and I know that some of you might have a problem because you don't think we should talk about truth and religion at the same sentence. There's too much disagreement and conflict, and we don't want an argument. We don't want any conflict, so we kind of side with Pilate a bit. What is truth after all? And when faced with the question, people answer in different ways. And so I've kind of categorized the different versions of truth that are out there. Now, I'm not using the big fancy words, because first off, when you hear the big fancy words, you'll understand why. But I've divided them into 4 camps. And being who I am, I decided to name them after animals, because they kind of illustrate what this camp believes. So first is the ostrich camp. Yes, I said ostrich. Truth is what is internally consistent for you. An ostrich, and I realize this is a myth, faced with danger or threat, sticks its head in the sand. Inside his own head, the ostrich is safe. It has no problems. Its view of the world is consistent and logical. It may not match the world outside, but it doesn't matter so long as the truth is internally coherent. This view has a name. We call it the coherence view of truth. The second is rainbow trout camp. Yes, I know. Truth is relative to your context. The trout has a rainbow made up of all these different colors being refracted by the same light. So for these people, truth may look and sound differently in different contexts, but somehow all truth claims are really equal or the same. This view has a name called the relativist view of truth, and that's the one most popular. That's the one that says, well, all paths lead to God. There's no one way to go to God the Father. You can go through Buddha, you can go through Islam, or you can go through... You get the point. We don't want to upset anybody, so all truth is equal. Then there's the beaver camp. Yes, I know. Truth is what works. A beaver makes dams and lodges that work for him. He doesn't care about the ecosystem around him, or the environment, or the forest, or the rest of the animals. He is the focus of his truth. Performed a native dance around their car every morning to protect it from deer collisions. Deer collisions would say, after 11 years, I've never hit a deer. See, it's true. We call that pragmatic view of truth. Finally is the crow camp. Truth is what corresponds to reality. A crow isn't imaginative, but a problem solver. They've been known to work through a 6-stage puzzle using tools and uncomfortable trial and error to get a food prize. This is the person who sees different worldviews as a puzzle of clues to sort through to find what's real. We call it the correspondence view of truth. Yeah, let's see, drives through a taxidermy shop. Thank you. So, here's my question. Which of these is your view of truth? Are you the ostrich, the rainbow trout, the beaver, or the crow? Well, if we were on Sesame Street, I could sing 3 of these things, 4 of these things, whatever. 3 of these things belong together. 1 of these things just doesn't belong. You remember that? Okay. So, of those 3 camps, one of those things is not like the others. One of those songs just doesn't belong. That is, it's determined in some sense that the reality is at 3 of those camps, who's the focus? Me, right? I say what's truth by what's in my head. I say what's truth where my perspective is. I say what's truth by what works for me. I don't care if it works for you, it just works for me. Only one of those is determined by the content, by the reality around it. Only one view of truth as something to be discovered, and that's the crow camp. The correspondence view of truth. In this view, and only this view, you have reality. It's not affected by what you believe. It's not affected by what you see. It's not affected by what works for you. It's overall everybody. Now, if truth is determined or chosen, then of course it's silly to go about defending any worldview because there's as truths as there are people. So why defend one thing as true? It's like defending the idea that red is the best color. However, if it's discovered, then that means truth is independent of you. It's objective. It's absolute. It doesn't change by the circumstances. Truth is truth. So attempting to find out those absolute truths matter. And if truth is discovered, then it makes sense to do what Jesus said to do. Look in Luke 11:9 and 10. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you shall find. Knock and the door shall be opened. For everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks the door will be open. Now you thought, okay, I always thought that was about evangelism. But if truth is discovered, it makes sense to seek it out, even at the risk of losing some cherished ideas. Because if truth corresponds to reality, it doesn't care about how it makes you feel, about your context, or even if it works. It only cares about one thing: reality. And since eternity might just be on the line, I'd say reality is definitely worth discovering. But now, let's ask, if we have reasons to define truth, like the crow and not the beaver, trout or ostrich, do we have reasons to believe truth is objective and not subjective? We do, and the main reason is a little rule called the rule of non-contradiction. Okay. Now I realize this, guys, that this is sounding like a philosophy or a logic class, but I'm building a foundation for a Christian worldview, and we need to do the basics. Okay. So basically, the law of non-contradiction says this: a thing cannot be both A and not A at the same time. Okay, if A is true, not A cannot be true. Let me put it a proposition that makes it a little easier to understand. The Empire State Building is in New York City. The Empire State Building is not in New York City. Now, if the Empire State Building is in New York City, obviously it can't not be in New York City at the same time. Then it cannot not true that the Empire State Building is not located in New York City. Or the Space Needle, or the Empire State Building cannot be both in New York City and not in New York City at the same time. That's easy enough. But problems start when you begin inputting worldview propositions into the formula. Take a simple like this: the Buddha offers the only way to a genuine afterlife. If the Buddha offers the only way to a wonderful afterlife, it cannot be true that a non-Buddha offers the only way to a wonderful afterlife. God is personal. If God is personal, then it cannot be true that God is impersonal. What this means is simply this: if two religious claims are mutually exclusive, meaning one affirms A and the other affirms non-A, at the same time, they violate the law of non-contradiction. But in fact, people violate that all the time when they say things like, religions are equally true. All religious statements are equally valid. Or, all paths lead to the sun. Now, just because you're making religious claims doesn't mean you get to exempt from the law of non-contradiction. To prove it, there's a true story of a Christian who was in a convention, in a conversation with a Zen Buddhist. He asked him the following question: if Jesus was right when he said that he was the only way of salvation, isn't it true that the Buddha cannot be the way of salvation? The Buddhist said, no. What's wrong with you Christians? Always someone wrong and someone right. Why can't it be that Christianity is true for you and Buddhism is true for me? The Christian said, so you agree with so you disagree with the law of non-contradiction? Because the law says A cannot equal not A? Are you saying it's true that Christianity is the only way and it's true that the non-Christianity is also the only way? Yes, he said. So what about the law of non-contradiction? Well, said the Buddhist, I don't believe in the law of non-contradiction. It's a Western idea, and the East doesn't accept it. And now I want you to listen to this really carefully. Follow along. Okay? The Christian said, okay, so you're telling me that you believe in a different law. It's called a law of relativism. The law could be said like this: A can equal non-A for the same time. The Empire State Building can be in New York and not in New York. Something can be true, and its opposite can also be true at the same time. Yes, the Buddhist said, the law of non-contradiction is clearly false. Law A. So that would mean that the law of contradiction was not A, right? Sure. So you're saying that because the law of relativism is true, the law of non-contradiction cannot be true. Yes, said the Buddhist. Do you realize what he just said? He said the law of relativism was true, and therefore the opposite, non-contradiction, could not be true. But he used non-contradiction to prove non-contradiction. The law is absolute, folks, just like gravity. Now, we had a word with what the Buddhists tried to do. It's called self-defeating. It's like saying, I cannot speak any English words. Let me give you another example. There's a I'll admit it, I like Star Trek. I used to watch Star Trek, the old original series. And I have one of the original videos called I, Mudd. I love that thing. It's one of my favorites. Right up there with Trouble with Tribbles. But it's one of my favorites. And I'll tell you why. They get kidnapped by some aliens, right? Alien robots, androids. They're perfectly logical. They have no emotions. They're not ruled by their passions, but they've rescued Harry Mudd, and Harry Mudd has made himself emperor of this planet, ruling all these androids, and so they've decided they want more specimens. So they kidnap this Enterprise, and they take them all down there, and they convince them that their life would be wonderful, and then they finally spring it on them that we're not letting humans leave here at all. We're going to take your ship, and we're going to take over the galaxy because humans are just too dangerous to be allowed on their own. And so, therefore, we're going to go out and serve them. And then they're so lazy and gullible that they'll all buy into it. So Kirk and them, of course, decide they have to save the day, which is what Kirk does. And so they start this campaign of non-logic. They do things like... they'll say things like, they'll go to two of the androids and say, I like you, but I don't like you, and they're identical. Well, I'm identical to her, that's why I don't like you. Illogical, illogical. And finally, they so mess up everybody that they finally get to main android, this guy named Norman. And Norman is so confused because he's got so much pressure on him from all the other androids in shutdown mode because they don't understand this human illogic. Finally tell him, Norman, I want you to listen to this very carefully. And Harry looks at him and says, Norman, I am lying. I always tell lies. That's right, Norman. Harry always lies. And then Harry looks at him and says, Norman, I am lying. And then, of course, Norman freaks out because I am lying. You can't be, if you're saying you're lying and you've already said that you always lie, which is true, but therefore, if you're saying I always lie, then you obviously are lying, and so that can't be true. And so by saying I am lying is really the truth, but then you always say you're lying. And he just goes through this loop thing. Okay. See, relativism is false like that, guys. The Buddhist, in trying to deny the law of non-contradiction, ask you to accept non-contradiction, thus disproving the point.